know Brian. I think most people probably do. Just to a word of explanation how Mike and I know Brian, and that is he led a Cliff College mission to Staines where we were living, I think in 1986, was it, Brian?
Yes, it'd be about then, I think.
About then, wasn't it? And you actually stayed with us, and
I did.
Yeah, and you survived staying with us.
I did.
But you're also well known to Highworth because you've been and preached several times there. And you know Mike and Gwen very well as well. And that was through, remind us, which college was it?
Yeah, it was the, what used to be called the, sort of, what was it called, Mike? You know, I was InterVarsity Fellowship, really. It was the Training Colleges Christian Union.
Right, okay.
In those far off days, yeah.
Yeah. Well done, that's good. And how long have you been a Methodist minister, Brian?
Oh gosh, 1971.
Right, okay. We won't give away your age or anything, but yeah, that's brilliant. Well done. And you I know how old you are, and you're doing very well. And you had the wonderful privilege of being president of the Methodist Conference 2000?
No, 95 to 96.
Oh, a bit earlier than what I thought. Yeah, right, okay.
Way back in the last century.
Yeah. But yeah, brilliant. So it's really good to have you with us tonight, Brian, and we're very grateful for you and Joyce being with us. And we do welcome you as old friends. And I'm going to hand over to you as you share with us on this passage from Acts chapter 1. I'm sorry that you only got a few verses. You actually gave me verses 1 to 11, and you only got verses 9 and 11. So sorry about that.
That's quite all right. I won't sing the rest for you. Okay, well, I thought as this week coincides with Ascension Day, it might be helpful just to look at that story of the Ascension from Acts chapter 1. It's not something we do very often because it always falls on a Thursday because it's sort of 40 days after Easter, and we're not normally in church on a Thursday. In any case, there are only a handful of references, only 3 specific references to the Ascension in the New Testament, and it's quite a difficult thing to visualize, isn't it? This sort of vertical takeoff idea of Jesus ascending into heaven. And yet it's a very important truth. We say in the creed, whenever we say the creed, he ascended into heaven. So I thought I'd just try and tease out a little bit of what it's all about, because you see the Ascension actually links back into the life and ministry of Jesus and links forward to what is to come, and they're all there in Acts chapter 1. First of all, it's just, I think I might describe it as a sign of achievement. It's Jesus's work on earth is finished. It marks the end of his earthly ministry. It's like you know, when the final curtain comes across and it says the end, and Luke tells us a cloud hid him from their sight. And when you think about the life and ministry of Jesus, there was always a sense of destiny and a purpose about it, even from his very earliest days when he was only 12. You remember that story of how he was found in the temple and his mum and dad weren't very pleased with him. And he said, "Did you not know that I must be about my Father's business?" And later on, John tells us, he said, "I've come down from heaven not to do my will, but to do the will of him who sent me." And all the time through his ministries, there's this sense of purpose, of destiny. It's interesting the way Jesus often uses the little phrase, "my hour" or "my time has not yet come." You remember the wedding that Jesus went to in Cana in Galilee. I always think the bride's parents must have been a bit disconcerted when they invited Jesus and he turned up with 12 hunking fellows behind him. I don't know whether they catered for them or not, but they ran out of wine, and Mary came to Jesus and said, you know, we've got a problem here. And Jesus, when we read it in the New Testament, it sounds a little bit rude, you know, woman, what is that to me? I must be, my hour is not yet come. And that repeats again later on in chapter 7 of John's Gospel, when he's at the Feast of Tabernacles and people tried to arrest him, but it says his hour had not yet come. And then the next chapter, Jesus is in the temple courts, but John tells us no one laid hands on him because his hour had not yet come. And then you get right through to almost to the end of John's Gospel, well, chapter 17, and you read these words: Father, the hour has come. And in the next few verses, he's arrested. So there's this sense of destiny that he's moving towards. And even on the cross, you remember how Jesus cried out, it is finished. It wasn't a cry of despair, you know, I've had it. It was a cry of victory and achievement. It meant the work was done. It was completed. It was fulfilled. It was signed off, if you like, a mark of triumph. And it may be that during this lockdown, some of you have had projects you've been working on, and if you're anything like me, we've been trying to clear the loft, and the time came when we completed it. And there's a real sense of achievement, isn't there, when you've done something that you set out to do, perhaps years and years before. And then in the letter to the Hebrews, the writer says, after he had provided purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty in heaven. I love that verse. He sat down at the right hand of the Majesty in heaven. Now, we Methodist ministers have a certain particular meaning for the phrase sat down. You know, when you want to retire, you have to apply to the conference to sit for permission to sit down. And that means your work is done. Your active ministry is over. That's a bit of a joke, actually, because although I sat down in the year 2000, but I seem to have been standing up for a long time since then. Life goes on, ministry goes on. And actually, Jesus, although he sat down at the right hand of the Father in heaven, his ministry goes on, because Paul tells us that he's constantly at the right hand of God making intercession for us. He's praying for us. So I like to think of the Ascension as the sort of final curtain, the completion of Jesus's earthly ministry. This coming weekend will be Cup final, and no doubt, I don't know whether it'll happen, but the Cup winners usually do an open top bus tour through the streets of their town or city. It's a victory parade, and this is what's happening as Jesus ascends to the Father in heaven. But it's also, as Luke tells us in chapter 1 and verse 8, you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes on you. There's a promise of power, and it's looking forward to Pentecost, looks back to the cross and resurrection, looks forward to Pentecost. And as Jesus' departure came nearer and nearer, he spoke more about the Spirit. And the last words ever recorded from the lips of Jesus are those words in Acts chapter 1 and verse 8, this promise that the Spirit would come and they would receive power and be witnesses for the gospel and for Jesus. So Ascension and Pentecost are inextricably linked. Jesus said to the disciples, and I imagine they scratched their heads a bit, because it was a strange thing to say, it is for your good that I go away. It's a good thing that I go away. Why? Well, Jesus said, unless I go, the advocate, the Spirit, won't come to you. It's a bit like, you know, in Methodism, well, I suppose in most denominations, you can't get the new minister until the old minister's moved out of the manse. It makes way for the next phase of ministry. And this is what Jesus is doing as he ascends into heaven. This is the promise that the new minister, if you like, the advocate, the Spirit, will come. And it's also a good thing for the disciples, because you see, while Jesus was around with them, they could only ever be with him in one place. He could only be in one place at one time. But that's not true of the Spirit. When the Spirit is given, wherever we are, in Knaresborough as we are, in Highworth, in Wootton Bassett, or wherever you happen to be, the Spirit is with us. Well, so is the risen Christ, of course. But this is a different ministry. It's unlimited. This another counselor that Jesus promised to send. You know, our English language is a bit what's the word? We don't have words to express what some of these Greek phrases mean. When Jesus said, I'm going to send you another comforter, another counselor, he used a particular Greek word. In English, if I say I'd like another book, you don't know whether I want another book the same as the one I've got, or whether you want a different book or another piece of cake. You don't know whether I want the same or different. But in Greek, the word that Jesus used means another of the same kind. I'm going to send you another person just like me, another comforter, another counselor, just like me, the other self of Jesus, if you like. And he's going to continue the ministry of Jesus throughout the world. So there's the promise of power here when the ascension takes place. God never intended a powerless church. When I was living in Staines, I used to commute up to Westminster Central Hall, where my office was. I did that for 12 years. And I used to go up to Waterloo and then over along the embankment, over Westminster Bridge, past the Houses of Parliament and across Parliament Square and into Central Hall. And I always used to pass Queen Boadicea. Well, I think we now call her Boudica, do we? And a fearsome looking woman in this chariot that looked at any minute it could take off, and these horses with their hooves raised and full of activity. But in 12 years, I never saw that statue move an inch. Now, Jesus didn't intend the church to be like that, a sort of commemoration of great things in the past. Life and power. One of the earlier principals of Cliff College, where I taught, Samuel Chadwick, put it like this. He said, the church that is man-managed instead of God-governed is doomed to failure. It's possible to excel in mechanics and to fail in dynamic. There is a superabundance of machinery in the church, but what is wanting, he said, is power. And that's what Paul longed for. I long to know him and the power of his resurrection. And that power is the same power, Paul goes on to say, the same as the mighty strength that he exerted when he raised Christ from the dead and seated him at his right hand in the heavenly realms. Joyce and I had the privilege in 1984 of going to the Methodist conference in Ghana in West Africa. And we were taken one day to see the great Akosombo Dam that was the pride and joy of President Nkrumah. And there'd been drought, unfortunately, for 2 years when we were there. And as we looked at the dam, there was a watermark where the water should be. And then several meters below it was the surface of the water. And our host said, this country is hobbling along below minimum operating level. Below minimum operating level. And sometimes I wonder if our church is hobbling along below minimum operating level. The power of the Spirit is available for us through the resurrection, ascension, and the gifting of the risen Lord. And the final thing here, the ascension points back to the cross and resurrection. It looks forward to Pentecost, but it also promises the return of Christ. We saw that in that little animated Bible reading, didn't we? That he will come again. The promise of power precedes the ascension, and the assurance of victory follows the ascension. Earthly ministry finished, but that's not the end of the drama. There's a final act to come. We say in our communion services, Christ has died, Christ is risen, Christ will come again. And just two brief important things about this coming again of Jesus as we see it in Acts chapter 1. And there are two very similar phrases. In verse 11, the angel says, this same Jesus, as you've seen, ascend into heaven, will come again. This same Jesus, the risen Lord, is our coming King. He promised it. Jesus said, I will come again. The apostles preached it. This same Jesus will come. The Lord himself will come. The angels affirmed it. This same Jesus, the one we know and love, will come again. This same Jesus. And the other phrase is, in the same way. In the same way, verse 9 tells us that a cloud hid him as he ascended into heaven. There's a mystery about that. But clouds, of course, in the Bible always signify the glory of God. The tabernacle in the Old Testament was often shrouded in cloud, the Shekinah glory of God. And the transfiguration, you remember, when the three of the disciples saw Jesus on the mountaintop talking with Moses and Elijah. The cloud covered him. John Wesley put it like this. He said, when Jesus came before, it was not like himself, but in the form of a servant. But his appearing in glory is properly his coming, in a manner worthy of the Son of God. So Jesus is Lord, and that's going to be manifest to all when he comes again. Jesus is Lord. So you see, the ascension is linked into all these major elements of the ministry and work of Jesus. And Martin Luther used to say, we should live as if Jesus was born yesterday, rose again today, and is coming again tomorrow. So the ascension has something to teach us. We're all subjects of the King of Kings. And, you know, there are no part-time kings. If Jesus is king, he's king forever. And there are no limited kings. A king rules over the whole of his kingdom. So wherever we are, whatever area of life we're involved in, Jesus is king. He's with us there. Outside the co-op, wherever it may be, Jesus is king. So we thank God for this wonderful story of the ascension. And I pray that he will teach us his truth through it. Thank you. Bless you.
Thank you very much, Brian. Lots to think about there. So I'm just going to give a moment of silence while we just think about what Brian said. And I very often like